Hey everybody, it's time for a book review. It's been quite a while since I've had a book review on this channel. And today it's a review of Flannery O'Connor's second and final novel, The Violent Bear It Away. I have the Library of America edition. And how to introduce this novel? I guess I should introduce how I got into Flannery O'Connor. I read A Good Man Is Hard to Find, which is probably the first short story, since she wrote a lot of short stories, which is initially probably the first short story most people who get into Flannery O'Connor read. It's typically her most well-known short story about the misfit who escapes a penitentiary and kills a family and a grandmother in Tennessee. And I read that back at a university, at Ball State University, when I was in community college, getting my general education out of the way. And I always found that to be a really paradoxical story, because one thing that Flannery O'Connor is well known for is how she works within a tradition. She's a Southern Gothic writer, so she's kind of in the same vein as William Faulkner, Carson McCullers, in that her stories take place in the South, and she even wrote an essay called Some Aspects of the Southern Grotesque, in which she deciphers and explains what a Southern Gothic novel typically has, which is it's going to have characters who are very downtrodden, who are morally and ethically a bit mixed, who are complicated people. You're going to have there's always going to be violence, and that is one of the main things that differentiates her from most Southern writers, is that the amount of violence she adds in her stories, and also her Catholic faith. Flannery O'Connor was a devout Catholic, and one thing that she even admits in some of her letters here in this collection, when she's talking to certain fans, is she feels, and this is a really interesting letter she gave, in which she describes how faith to her and Christianity is something that's even harder to attain than non-belief. And I think that adds really well to the novel The Violent Bear It Away, which the title itself, I always noticed when I knew of the novel many years before I even tackled it, and I always thought the title of the novel is it just sounds interesting. The Violent Bear It Away. It makes you think, like, what does that mean in context to this novel? And it's actually a Bible verse from the book of Matthew. It's Matthew chapter 11, verse 12, I believe, in which it's describing that in the days of John the Baptist, violent people, in the kingdom of heaven, there's violence, or that there's chaos in that. I'm paraphrasing, so don't go crazy with me. And the end of that verse is that, and the violent bear it away. They bear away, they seize the kingdom of the heavens at this time, essentially. And so I'm trying to figure, how does that idea relate to this novel? The novel is about Marion Tarwater. He's a teenage boy who is raised by his great uncle, who is very heavily, like, he wants him to be a prophet. He's raising him to follow in his footsteps and to be like Elijah and Elisha, and be like, one of these days you're going to have to baptize your bishop, who's one of your cousins. You have to baptize him, because if you don't, the world's falling apart. So he's raising Tarwater to be a prophet in his shoes. And then there's the other uncle of his named Raber, who is a school teacher, and he is staunchly against the great uncle, who the school teacher is this, he's kind of it's really strange how Flannery O'Connor describes him and his motivations, because he's obviously a character she doesn't agree with. To her, he is this amalgamation of a rationalist, of someone who doesn't believe in spiritual or even in religion. He views it as something irrational. But what's really interesting in the novel is how she gets into, there's a scene in the novel in which Raber is going after Tarwater because he leaves the house at night, and he follows him to a church, and he's outside the window, Raber is, watching through the window, and there's this girl who's giving this little sermon of hers, and throughout this sermon, it keeps coming back to her giving a sermon versus him remembering back in his past when he was a kid, when the great uncle tried to raise him as a prophet. And it's really interesting how she gets into the psychology of Raber. When he was a kid, he was baptized and he believed in the word of God and that he was going to be a prophet. But something happens to him later down in life in which he gets rid of, where he finds out that this was a delusion. This is what he believes, though. And because of this, he doesn't want Tarwater to go down the same path as him. He believes that religion is just, it's a delusion. It's an illusion, and it's just going to lead you down the wrong path. Throughout many instances in the novel, when he's talking to Tarwater after the great uncle passes away, is like, oh, you'll find out that this is just wrong. This is a delusion. I want to teach you the right way. He tries to teach you that Jesus is the word, is who runs your life, but really it's just you. And there's also another Christian, like a really complicated, this makes all the more things complicated when Tarwater has this inner voice that speaks to him all the time. And this kind of raises a lot of criticisms, like maybe Tarwater might be a schizophrenic because he's hearing two different voices. He hears the voice in his head, which Flannery O'Connor admits in her letters to people that the voice is supposed to be the devil, that that's what it is. And the voice is always telling him to be like, oh, look, just do what you need to do. Like, you control your life. Like the prophets and all those calls of religion, like that's just bogus. Like that's just it's not going to lead you down the right path. You'll only be troubled if you go down that path. You're the only one who controls your destiny. And with these opposing voices going on with the young Tarwater, what I find really troubling of the work, but also gives it its really complicated and really visceral nature, is how it's, in a way, I don't know if O'Connor was intentionally doing this, but it kind of raises this argument of how there's a boy who is having two sides. The side of his great uncle saying, you need to be a prophet. This is all going to be on you. Like, you have to go to it when it calls for you, and you'll know when it is. Versus the school teacher who wants to teach him that rationality is what you need to learn. Like, only you can control your destiny, and also I'm going to teach you the right ways, and I'm going to observe you. It's like, he's kind of like an experiment in this way. He's an experiment from two different parties. It's like the environment versus it's the nature versus nurture argument of psychology and sociology that O'Connor's kind of depicting here. But I don't think that was necessary. But of course, since she was very devoutly Catholic, I'm not so certain if I might find out later the further I read into her letters. But it's a really complicated story of a person's soul being controlled and molded by the environment and by different people. So Tarwater, and that's kind of explicit in the narrative itself, that Tarwater is constantly mood swings a lot. He'll be very, like, especially when it comes to Bishop, the boy who it's implied that he might be having Down syndrome. There's something not right about him. He's very, like, he'll cry on occasions at things. He'll want to hop on Raber a lot, or even he wants to get Tarwater's attention a lot, but Tarwater's always like, I don't want to look at you. Get away from me. Like, you're a freak. I don't even want to look you in the eyes, essentially. Like, and as a matter of fact, this is a crucial point of how I think O'Connor's understanding of what mercy and, like, what love is kind of is connected by how Raber and Tarwater both react to Bishop. Raber admits, like, he also admits, and there's a flashback in which he attempted to drown him at a beach at one point. But then he ended up not doing it because he thinks to himself, like, without Bishop, what is my life exactly? Like, I feel like I'm this rationalist that only through, like, reason can I get through my life. But he also acknowledges that Bishop is kind of this stumbling block for him. He doesn't know how he could live without Bishop, even though he even treats Bishop like he's just a nuisance at times. He'll just be like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. But, he even has this interior monologue, and it's a really important moment in the novel. I'm trying to remember how it's said, in which Raber is discussing how, or at least he's thinking about how, like, at moments when he's at pause, there's a introspection that turns on in him. He calls it a kind of love that he wants to reject. And when I read this passage, it came to mind automatically, Albert Camus' The Stranger. I wonder if Flannery O'Connor I wonder if she used The Stranger as a template, as part of the template to make Raber, because like in The Stranger, at the end of that novel, spoilers, the stranger is arrested for shooting an Arab, and a priest is in his cell before he's going to be killed, and he offers him salvation like through faith. But the stranger is angry, and he says, I don't want your delusions. I don't care about it. Like, I know it is false. I don't want false consolation. And Raber is essentially admitting this. He's saying that when he feels that he's in a moment of like, where he's like looking at he'll give an example, like if I'm looking at something, or if I'm like in a moment of reverie, I feel this kind of deep love of something coming over me, but I want to reject it. I reject it because it's irrational. And that is kind of like that's how he relates to the stranger in Camus. I would argue actually maybe she did use this intentionally, because Flannery O'Connor wrote in a time when the existentialist movements of Camus and Sartre were kind of growing over across Europe and across the world. This is after World War II. So this is probably her addressing a caricature or an idea that she finds problematic in her time, since she is a devout Catholic. And with this being the case, since Raber doesn't want this idea of love, and he just wants to treat Tarwater as kind of an experiment in and of itself for rationality, this adds to Tarwater's like mental and cognitive like chaotic state, because throughout the novel, like I say, and even later down in the novel, the great-grandfather gives Tarwater a prophecy, or at least something. He tells him, he says, when I die, I want two things. One, I want to be buried in a Christian manner, and I want you to have baptized bishop. I want those two things to be my final wishes for you to do as a prophet. And because Tarwater in the beginning of the novel sets the house on fire after he finds out that the grandfather's dead, and he's drunk, he doesn't know that Buford, his African-American, I don't know if they're necessarily a slave at this point, or they're just, this was still during the before the Civil Rights era, so he was just a person who lives there. He actually buries the old great-uncle, but Tarwater never knows that because he's drunk, and he never figures that out until the very end of the novel. But with that being said, Tarwater eventually drowns Bishop, and this is where the paradox of this narrative comes into play. Through his drowning of Bishop, did he technically baptize him at the same time? This is a critical problem in this novel. And for me, I would probably say he did both kill him and he did baptize him, because if there's one element in O'Connor's fiction that is very prevalent, it's that redemption and faith and mercy can be attained even through acts of brutal violence. Because that's what happens in A Good Man Is Hard to Find, when the misfit kills the grandmother, when at this last moment where she feels like she's giving him a moment of like mercy, or not mercy, she's giving him a moment of love. It's kind of like this love that Raber is trying to get rid of or to ignore in the novel. She says like, oh, I know you, like I'm paraphrasing, at the end of A Good Man Is Hard to Find, because it's been a while since I've read it, she says something along the lines to the misfit like, I know you, you're my son. She's giving him a sense of affection, that she loves him. And right when she does that, that's when he shoots her and she dies. He kills her at that crucial moment where she's giving him affection. And because of her complicated understanding of redemption, this is why I think the title of the novel, in connection to the biblical verse, is interesting, because it's not, maybe it's not necessarily a paradox. Maybe that this is just O'Connor's way of saying you can have redemption and salvation through violent acts, because in a way, this is our natural state in the world. Our natural state is we're always going to fall into violence, into hatred, into contradictions, into hypocrisies. And you can find aspects of the divine in that. And with that being the case, later on in the novel, because Tarwater is being conflicted by these two sides, he ends up being picked up after he kills Bishop. Rayber is no longer in the narrative. He's gone. And it describes how he even hears, like, he's in this hotel room and he hears the drowning through his earpiece, that he knows that he's being killed by Tarwater. And it describes how now that Bishop is gone, he doesn't really know what to do at this point. Like, everything is just silent to him. So his existence in this narrative is no longer needed. Like, and it's very existential in that respect, because since Rayber says he doesn't really know what he would do without Bishop, now that he's not there with him, what does he do at that point? And with that, Tarwater gets into a car with this other character who ends up getting him drunk and raping him in the forest. And once that happens, Tarwater is at this point where he feels everything is lost. So he takes a branch from a tree and he just starts burning the forest down, the woods. He starts burning everything down. And when he's going back to his old great-grandfather's place to burn everything down, that's when he comes across what he doesn't know. Preceding everything in the narrative, he didn't know that Buford gave him a Christian burial. And with this revelation at the very end, when he's at this bottom, he has gone through so much hell at this point. Tarwater being the victim and just the experiment of both of these parties. Like, I don't think anyone can argue that he hasn't been a victim by just these two forces saying, you have to live like this. No, you have to live like this. You have to be a prophet. No, you have to be this reasonable reason, like Trump said, like it. And it has gone crazy for him. It has wrecked his life. Like, he doesn't know what to, like, how would you live at that point? But then at the very end, when he's literally burning the woods down, and just after being raped and losing Rayber as a guardian and losing his great uncle and everything he's gone through, it describes that there's a hunger in him, but he can't quench it. It's not a hunger that he really feels through eating, because when he eats, he gets kind of sick. But it gets described that maybe the hunger is a spiritual hunger. A hunger to find a meaning beyond all this meaninglessness. And he finds it at the end when he notices that the two prophecies that his great uncle told him that came true. He got a Christian burial, and he technically baptized Bishop. And because of that, at the very end of the novel, after everything has fallen apart, Bishop heads back to the city, where it describes that the children of God lay sleeping. So he has officially noticed that his prophet, his prediction of being a prophet has been fulfilled necessarily. So reading this novel is a bit of a ride, because you really don't know where it's going to take you. But it can verge on the line of parody at times, because it's obvious that because O'Connor views Rayber as a negative force in the world, sometimes like his little pseudo-psychology talks can seem a bit dated at the time, because he just feels that if he observes everything that Tarwater's doing, that he can just predict what's going to happen. It's like, it's very superficial at points, but I think it works for what this narrative is trying to accomplish, which is, just like I say, it's about a boy, Tarwater, who's being forced by two opposing forces, and he has to choose one of them, or at least he has to find some path, and it ends up in the path of being the prophet that his great uncle said that would happen to him. It's just it didn't happen the way you would think it would. So The Violent Buried Away, when it comes to the title, I would say it's reminiscent of how violence, is it just physical violence? Is it just the violence that you commit on another person? Or is it the violence that happens on you spiritually as well? Is it a spiritual type of violence that tears away from people? And with that being the case, I think it's something that is really hard to tackle and to address at points, because like I say, like Tarwater, up until this last moment, is burning things down. He goes on rages, but who knows if maybe when he goes down to the city to baptize the children or to preach the word at the very end, that's where the novel ends. It never lets you know what he's going to do when he gets there. Is he going to continually, like, maybe burn shit down? Is he going to harm other people and to spread the word? We don't really know. But with that being the case, even when Bishop is baptized, because he has Down syndrome, it's even mentioned by Tarwater throughout the points in the novel, and Rayburn himself. It's like, maybe it's best that he just wasn't even born. So with this natural state of humanity, as O'Connor likes to view it, it makes sense why Cormac McCarthy loves Flannery O'Connor in his works, especially because she sees the world as how it really is. Like, you can find faith and mercy and salvation and even the divine in the natural world, but lo and behold, the natural world is full of just depravity and grotesque and just violent and just manipulative people. So you're going to have to find a way to transcend those horrible aspects of reality. But to her, in a way, violence and aggression and just the dark aspects of human nature can lead to a type of salvation. And so I think it's a great novel. It's a masterpiece in many ways. It's very well written. The characters, like I say, while they can be a bit cliche at points, with Rayburn at least, I can see how Faulkner influenced her as well. I kind of want to do an analysis on this novel because of how conflicting and how complicated it is as a text. So I might do an analysis of it, but I promised you guys that I would be doing analysis of, like, Shakespeare and Jordan Peterson and other people, but I have a life outside of this, so sometimes, and I also, my passions kind of take me wherever I want to at the time. I can't really control my passions at the time. Like, it's usually like a sense of taste. So we'll see where it goes. I just felt the need to give you guys a review of a novel because it's been such a long time since I've done that. I can't remember what the last novel was I did a review on. Maybe it was The Netanyahus by Joshua Cohen, and that's almost a year ago now. So I got to get back on that track. So I'm still working on some other things like the Peterson stuff and the Shakespeare stuff. I'm also going to be working on some Dostoevsky, and I need to reread McCarthy before The Passenger and Stella Maris comes out. So I'll keep you guys updated on all that. And if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time. Hopefully it won't be too far away.